I love to sit in my backyard and watch the trees as they sway in the wind and listen to the birds singing. There's a peace I get when I think about being a part of nature. And this is a key point. We are not a visitor. We are not an outsider to nature. We are a part of it. When we think about ecosystems, we are one of the members of it. We are dependent on our world, and we have an impact on the environment around us. Everything is connected in one giant interdependent system that reaches from you and I into the entirety of the cosmos. We have developed both in our biology and in our mental habits ways of seeing the world that make it easier for us to navigate it. We see objects like rocks and doors and people as solid objects, even though we know that from an atomic level, they and we and everything else are mostly empty space. Although this way of looking at the world is not accurate in a technical sense, it makes it possible for us to learn about our world, to move about in it, to think about it. These concepts of objects, of things, are easier to navigate in our mind rather than trying to perceive of everything as different configurations of particles and forces. But it's important that we do not confuse our categories for naming for the ultimate reality. Our view of the world is a layer on top of reality. Our failure to recognize this in the past has led us down the road of destruction because we failed to recognize things were connected and interdependent. Our way of life has caused great destruction to our environment, and in many ways we are working to save ourselves from our past ignorance. Spirituality is about our quality and experience of life. As spiritual people, we need to take time to understand how everything is connected so that we can embrace ways of living that are affirming to life. The nature of reality and how everything is connected are, of course, topics which we are continuously learning. So even though this is not the final word on the topic, it will be helpful for us to review what we know so far. This will be a high-level, simplified explanation so that even if you are a non-specialist, you can have a basic orientation to how things work. Reality that we experience on a day-to-day basis can be explained by a handful of particles and forces. This is referred to as the Standard Model. Kind of a boring name for something so profound, but there it is. Having a basic concept of how the world works is vital to understanding reality. Wisdom is our ability to act in the world, to make decisions that are in our best interest. Wisdom is learning to live in harmony with nature, to work with the way things are rather than against them. When humans wanted to learn how to fly, it was only those that correctly conceived of how things worked that were successful. I will keep this very basic so you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand it. Let's start with an atom. An atom is comprised of a nucleus in the center and one or more electrons spinning around the nucleus. The nucleus can be broken down into two additional parts, the proton and the neutron. Both the proton and the neutron are comprised of smaller particles called quarks. The electrons and the quarks that make up the atom are known as particles. What holds these particles together in an atom are forces. These forces are actually an exchange of a certain kind of particle. A gauge particle is what the class is called. Protons and neutrons are made of 3 quarks each, and the force that holds them together is called the strong nuclear force. This force is an exchange of the type of particle called a gluon. The strong nuclear force is extremely powerful, but only operates at a subatomic level. The force that holds the electrons around the nucleus is called electromagnetism. The particle for this force is called a photon. Electromagnetism is a force that we are much more familiar with. We use electricity and magnets all the time. Also, when a photon particle is released, we perceive it as light. So this is the basic parts of an atom and how they are held together. There are different configurations of atoms in terms of the number of neutrons or protons and the number of electrons that they have. The different configurations of atoms are known as elements, such as hydrogen or carbon. The known elements are arranged in a chart that we call the periodic table of elements. Atoms are really small. Think about the size of a period in a typical book. It takes something like 1,000,000 atoms lined up end to end to go across the diameter of that period. And atoms are mostly empty space. If you imagine a nucleus of an atom to be the size of a basketball, and then the electrons would be about the size of a bee, flying around the basketball at a distance of several miles. You and me and all matter is made mostly of empty space. Atoms can be held together essentially through a sharing of electrons via the electromagnetic force. And these collections of atoms are known then as molecules. Molecules form still more complex structures until they represent everything that we experience in our world. Everything we experience is made up of these particles and forces, atoms and molecules. There's just one force left to talk about in our simplified model, and that is gravity. Gravity is at the forefront of physics research because we have two very different and incompatible ways of understanding what it is. Gravity is the weakest of the forces, but it operates at very long distances and it can accumulate. Gravity is a force between two objects of mass, so when atoms come together and form larger and larger structures, their combined mass increases and therefore the gravitational force becomes stronger. We as people exert a certain amount of gravitational force, but the planet as a much larger mass exerts an even stronger gravitational force. The level of particles and forces that we have been talking about so far is what we would call quantum mechanics. In quantum mechanics, forces are understood as an exchange of particles, like gauge particles and the photon. In quantum mechanics, we expect to find a particle called a graviton that would explain how gravity works, but this has not been discovered just yet. Gravity up to this point has been explained via Einstein's general relativity as a curvature of space and time. This is essentially a geometrical way of understanding gravity as objects move towards one another based on curvatures of space. Try to imagine a bed that is made up with a sheet pulled tight. If you took a golf ball and rolled it across the bed, it would roll in a straight line. Now imagine a bowling ball. And you place that bowling ball in the middle of the bed. It'll sink down some, causing the areas around it to curve towards itself. Now try to roll the golf ball across the bed somewhat past the bowling ball. As that golf ball gets closer to the bowling ball, the curve of the bed will cause the golf ball to move towards the bowling ball. This is basically Einstein's theory of gravity and how it works. There are two theories at the moment that are trying to unify quantum mechanics and general relativity. They are known as string theory and loop quantum gravity. So while we are awaiting a fuller understanding of gravity, we do have a good understanding of its effects, even if we don't have a clear understanding of its mechanics. Now let's take a moment and reflect on what we've just covered. These little particles and a few forces combine into atoms, which combine into everything we experience. The air we breathe, the water we drink, plants and animals, planets and stars. As we study the way things work, we discover patterns that we describe as physics and chemistry. It is truly an awe-inspiring world that we are a part of, filled with mystery and wonder. Just sit with that for a moment. Sit back today and just really soak it in. This has been a look at the very small. In the next episode, we will explore the cosmic level of connectedness.